Всем привет. Меня зовут
One,
Артем.
two, three. Hi everyone, my name is Artyom. I manage analysis department, analysis of malicious code and threat intelligence. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. It's an honor to wrap the track, this track in PH Days 2025, and I'm going to talk about PhantomCore today. These are criminals, cyber criminals, and in order for us to be in one context, let's try to do that.
Собственно, рассмотрим, чем нас самих зацепила данная группа.
Let's see why we're interested in this group at the start of their activities, at the start of 2024. And the first reason is their targeted country is Russia. Why is it their key targeted Russia? Because later we got hold of information that also Belarus, organizations in Belarus were attacked as well. And the first well-known case of exploitation of vulnerabilities of 2024 in when RAR was used, but in modification for RAR archives. And also the group is using custom malware, which is quite peculiar these days. And not long before the attack, test samples of this malware were uploaded to Virus Total platform. And next to this point, you can see a screenshot of the source of file uploading, and you can see that it's Kiev, so we can see the source of this threat. In the first attack, the domain name and C2 address was also disguised to Russian organization, and also we must mention that the letters are quite quality, and some documents that we're using, they are mimicking to accounts and invoices and agreements, and they had some seals and all the signatures, and they are not allowed for public downloading. So why did I choose this topic? Because these cyber criminals attack organizations in Russia. They use custom malware. They do high-quality email distribution up until today. And what has not been mentioned on the slide, later we learned that in a number of successful attacks of this group, it led to encrypting infrastructure of the victims. So what's going to be a part of this report? We will look at malwares and first vectors of attack. Also, we will consider a connection of this group to activities in 2022. I will also mention that previously we thought that we started their activity in 2024, but actually it's 2022. We will also look at distribution of the organizations and the industries that the group is operating in. Also, we will see how these criminals are using legitimate or compromised infrastructure in their attacks. Also, we will see what actually happened after infection, what were the consequences. Let's start. This is the timeline of malware activity produced by this group. Currently, I would make three conclusions here. First, we're seeing that activities is from 2024 until March 2025, and it means that we're detecting activity of this group of every month except for February 2025. Also wanted to draw attention to the amount of malwares and their modifications and their versions. These names are not meaningful to you right now, but the number, like the quantity, is interesting. The scale, and it characterizes that the group updates the malware quite often. And activity in 2022, particularly StatRat, will be looked into in more detail, and we will explain why we attributed it to this group in 2022, but we detected it in early 2024. Let's start with initial vectors of attack, and When I'm saying initial vector of attack, what I mean is interaction of the technique of uploading malware after the user interacts with the phishing email and the content of phishing email. So the first vector of attack is vulnerability of 2023 in WinRAR, named 38831. The point of this vulnerability is it allows to run random code when in contact with legitimate file. On the slides, you can see an example of archive generated in case if the user clicks the legitimate document, then the file from this directory will be processed and it will be run. This file will be run on the computer. What I like to mention here is that this vulnerability and public proof of concept related to zip archives, however, the group was using RAR, and it's not only about file extension, but about binary objects themselves and their binary signatures, etc. We could not find any similar RAR archives anywhere in the network that would be used by any other criminal groups. Also, I wanted to emphasize that this vulnerability was corrected in patch 6.23 of WinRAR software in August 2023, despite the fact that criminals used it in 2024, and throughout a long time they have been making use of it. And I wanted to give a recommendation: update your software on endpoints, even if it's WinRAR. Please update it timely. The next vector of attack is XLS macro pack. The point of this vector is a distribution of XLS files which contained VBA code. Presumably, these XLS files were generated with the help of a public instrument macro pack. The purpose of this VBA is downloading code from a remote server and executing it in the memory. It did not become popular by the group. It was used only during 1 month in July 2024. And as we can see from the screenshot, it was used in parallel with the vulnerability that we described in the previous slide, which drives us to the conclusion that this method was used as a backup in case if the endpoint will not process the vulnerability of 2023. The next vector of attack is vulnerability of 2024 in Microsoft 43451. The point of this vulnerability is theft of NTLM open hash when the user interacts with URL files. When I'm saying interacts, I mean transferring, copying, highlighting with the right button of your mouse without double click. No double click. Vulnerability was used for 1 month. The criminals were sending this archive with URL file, and there's one nuance. In order to exploit this vulnerability, you need to unarchive this, and you need to use it in the file system. And also, these files contained URL parameters that contained a link to the malware. And in order to infect the endpoint, you need to click twice this file. You need to run it, and only then this link gets connected and the file will be downloaded. And we'll make a conclusion that this vulnerability was used, but in order to infect it, it takes to run the file. The next vector is rogue RDP. It's putting together RDP files in order to connect to remote host, but with certain settings that include monitoring of logical disks, redirecting exchange buffer, different tubes, and criminals would distribute these RDP files. And once the victim gets connected to remote host, then in a few seconds they would copy a copy of the malicious file to startup directory to endpoint. When the system was restarted, rebooted, then infection would be run. And the last vector of attack is polyglot. Polyglot got its name because of similar polyglot files that are well known. On a high level, these polyglot files can contain a few types, and depending on the means of launch, they will be processed different ways. In this case, criminals would send an archive. An executed file had zip exec extension, and it contained a zip object. So in case if the user on the host has a software that processes zip files by default, so archiving software, then in case if you double click, then it will be open from overlay. It's arrow number 1. But if we look at the structure of the file, it's arrow number 2. Then it's PE64, it's packed by UPX, and it's a run file, and it contains an archive. And it's run as an executed file through an LMK file, which is right next to it. It's number 3, which has a command to launch it. It's start cmd exam. This version was used in 2024. In 2025, they updated the option of using this vector. Specifically, they started executing the start file right away, and they disguised it for archive. But on top of that, it also contains a PDF document. On the screenshots on the right, you can see it, which is binary signatures of these objects. And if the user does a double click on the file, then the archive will open. It has LNK file. LNK command this time is more complicated, but actually all that it does, it just finds executed file in the file system, which is a file with zip extension, and by strict name, it starts it, and then it extracts a PDF document with a specific shift. It puts it to a temporary directory and reflects it. So for the user, it completes the cycle. They click the button and deploy is reflected. And the previous option decoy did not get reflected. So this is an improved version. Also, there are no archives in the archive, and it may be suspicious for the user. Also, takeaways from the initial vectors. There have been at least 5 initial vectors, and it's a characteristic of the group, and it means that they like changing the vectors with the main goal of avoiding early detection. Also, the quality of the group. In most of their attacks, the files are disguised as contracts, invoices, etc. And the only exception is approaching the paper in the initial vector, where they would distribute RDP files to get connected to test machines. And the third takeaway is initial vectors of the group are often quite customized. If you look at the most popular vectors, which is a vulnerability of 2024, WinRAR, they use a RAR variation. However, the others are using zip archives. So the top polyglot technique that is quite unique, it was updated in 2025 in order to be hidden better in the system. Now we can switch to malware. And the first thing that we should look at is our vision and what are the versions of the malware and what are the types of malware. We classify to uploaders and Trojans of remote access. Uploaders are there in order to just upload the next stages or next modules, and Trojans of remote access, they are just our RATs. The nuance in the later version, uploaders maybe will have the option to execute random teams in Windows Interpreter, but we split them by the type of their application. There are 3 characteristics. The first ones are quite primitive, but they are launched by initial vectors, and RATs are kicking in at further stages of infection. Also, it's a type of communication between C2 address. In uploaders, it's HTTP protocol, and in RAT, it's RSocket. Also, RATs may have a backup C2 to communicate with the server. It's described by fallback channels technique, but downloaders have only one C2. Also, there are exceptions. The exception is PhantomDL version 4. where the file was distributed and was started by initial vectors, but it had air-socked downloader, and it had a chance to store a backup C2, but it was an exception. Let's start with downloaders. The first downloader is PhantomCore downloader. It was written on C#. It's quite a simple downloader. It has a link to file transfer IO, transfer to share files. It knocks into it, it starts the stage, it downloads, and gets planted into the system as a planned task. It's the only downloader that was created in a planned task in the task planner, and we also described it, but more details could be available on the QR code on the slide. The next downloader is PhantomDL. This downloader was rewritten to Golang language, and it has become a more smart downloader. It was not just starting to start the link, it was knocking to C2. It was waiting for a command that would contain a URL address to download next modules and stages. First, it happens in cycles, so you can download a few stages right away. And it doesn't just request workload from any C2. And in case if you don't like the host, then you could use geofencing and you will not even get exposed. The first and the second versions, what's different between them? Name of the page, of gateways for C2 and URLs. On top of that, the second version did not have garble obfuscation, and this way the project got its name. It's called PhantomDL, and we described it in our blog, Invisible Connections. You can learn more about this downloader there using a hashtag. And Phantom 3, it has an option of running random commands in Windows Interpreter, and it got the first opportunity of RATs. We never saw it before. In downloaders, it was a revelation to us. Version 4 became even better. It has resocket protocol, and also it gets a chance to save the second C2, and we couldn't know how to differentiate these malwares and why are they using two malwares at the same time, and they're more or less the same. Still, we realized that we can keep on looking at that because we found Kia CDL and KSL trim. They were written on C++. It's the first language in their arsenal. And here we got, see the protocol. The protocol is on HTTP once again, and it has one C2. So it fell back into its places. In these versions, the names got changed. They have two letters now, but in terms of their functionality, they remain the same. It's downloading files to the infected host, random starting commands in Windows Interpreter, also running files. And what's the difference between these versions? It's a set of commands and their functional capabilities, and their names are wrapped from PDB paths in the files. And the first one is KSC. I'm sure it's clear that they are guys in Kaspersky Security Center. And then it's stream, and they erase the command. The next malware, download malware, is GRAC backdoor. This file is yet again to Golang coding language. It's not a special malware. It had C++ versions as well, but they were smaller ones, so they only could download files to the host and running random commands. And it got its name simply because of the library that it was using to interact with C2, which is gRequest, which is library for Golang. And the last one is PyTask backdoor. It has an alternative name from Kaspersky. Kaspersky call it Phantom Pyramid. And why is it significant? It's the fourth coding language. It's Python. It was compiled and put together with the help of PyInstalller, so it was distributed as an installed file. In terms of commands are the same. pvd as cd in order to get key directory of the process and to change it. And a load command loads files to the infected host, and Last one is starting random commands in Windows command interpreter. And based on the commands that are used by these downloaders, why do we believe that these are downloaders, however they run commands? We found that random C and D commands were run. And what are the conclusions here? We will not describe every command, every team, but it's a group of criminals. They scan network of users, they scan file system, they get system information, they get hold of it, and they have two goals here. The first goal is quite trivial, to get access to information about the infected host and to think through how to infect it further. The second is filtering the infected system and in case it via filter by output of any command, this host does not pass the verification, then they send command shut down with the parameters to shut down the system or to reboot it, so they stop their infection. And based on our vision, the way we see this, next criminals send the command to download the next stage or additional modules. Now let's switch to Phantom RAT. The first version, just like the first downloader, was written based on C#. It has average number of downloaders. It's random commands downloading files to the infected host. But why RAT is different is download command, which downloads files from the infected system, random files. I mean, there was a protocol of our socket communication, the opportunity to save the second C2, and the name was attributed because of the name of the project. It's Phantom. You can see it on the slide. The next version is different from the first one because it was written by Golang and it got additional commands to start files, so the start command. In the third version, we detected it at the same time as the second version. The third version had 4 additional commands, and here I would dwell a little bit longer. The first command downloaded 3 possible modules by keyword SOX5, persistent, and or syscall, and 3 other commands are there to manage these modules. Persistent and syscall, in terms of their realization, are quite similar. They just added to the file path and they started with additional parameters. SOX5 had additional start-stop flag, which would either start the module with an additional argument or it would stop all the processes using the name of the process net called exec. We managed to get hold of 2 of 3 modules, which is persistent and SOX5. Persistent is a module based on the name. It's there to persist in the system by creating tasks in a task planner. Module is written on Golang. It has 3 parameters, name, file path, and a flag of admin rights. By these characteristics, it creates the task. And I would draw your attention to the following. Creating the task is very similar in terms of logic with the first downloader, despite the fact that was written on C# and this one is Golang. But they're using a template to create XML file. They may have the same file. It may be link XML. Then they start the command in cmd xz schedule task with the parameter create. A SOX5 module is quite a simple service. It processes SOX file protocol. It has only 1 argument. This is the port that it will use to listen. And Syscom Excel, unfortunately, we don't have it. And the last version of Phantom RAT that was detected up until now is Phantom RAT version 4. It's on Golang language, but it was significantly adjusted. The commands that we have just discussed are not there anymore, but there are new commands. The first command that was new, and the only one that was described, gives the opportunity to update configuration. This way the command comes It will contain two additional C2 address. One is a backup and the number of ports to them. These addresses are put into the register. The keys and their definition are on the slide. And after the start, malware runs to this register. In case if there are any values here, then it will use them. Phantom RAT version 4 has meta protection. It stores pre-installed certificates that are used in one case, they're used for identification on the server, and second, in order to check authenticity of the server. This way, they prevent interception and of the network traffic. What are the conclusions? First, these criminals are change their software. Oftentimes, they change coding languages and the code base, and the key purpose is to avoid detection. Second, the key properties that these instruments have was the key property of downloader, starting random commands in Windows and downloading files on the expected host. RITs have all these opportunities, but also they can upload files from the infected host. And how their tools are developing. In terms of the downloader, the first downloader was quite simple. It knocks on the link, it clicks the link, it starts the file. The second one clicks on C2, is waiting for the command with URL it will use to download the file. And then we have malware that can scan the system, performing random CMD commands. With RATs, every remote access friend, with every next version, it would have more capabilities. It just helps to manage this malware in a more convenient manner. Also, it has meta protection in version 4, which prevents replacement and interception of this traffic. We are done with malwares. Now we can switch to 2022. On this slide, you can see 6 graphs with a part of infrastructure of PhantomCore, and in the bottom you can see domain support secure.ru, which is connected with infrastructure of the group. These domains were used as C2 in the first attacks, and at the top you can see identical domain support security.ru. But if we look at the dates of their registration, then the difference is about 15 minutes. This is why we connected this domain with PhantomCore. We attributed them to each other and we started looking into this and researching it. And during the research, we found out a few domains, and one of them is highlighted with a red rectangular, but the date of registration is 2022. So first we thought it would be maybe it's false, but when we researched domains, when we did virus totals tests, then we detected certain files, we decided to analyze them. Here's what we arrived at. We realized that the first file, in the first file, the chain of infection is validator.msc. We can see that in terms of their properties, it disguises as Roskomnadzor, Win.0, some software. So it pretends to be Roskomnadzor. And so it's a dropper which extracts 2 files and starts them. The first is malware and the second is decoy file. The page is presented on the slide and is validator 1.0, which will test your network if it complies with the federal law. This file definitely also gets animation of this verification, and it shows to the user that verification is successful. But what's at the background? At the background is StatRAT. It's a very peculiar malware, a lot of functionality. It's also written at .NET, on C#. It contains a stealer module. Its capabilities are described in point 1, to be exact, the data that it uploads, and a lot of commands. I will not list them to you, but the most interesting one is why it wipes files. Wiping files is a peculiar thing. It gets a command destroy. It requests to the server, it gets logical disks. If it fails to receive them, then it just zeroes data. It wipes data in all logical disks that it finds on the system. On top of that, When it initializes, it runs the planned task. After the next reboot of the system or once the user authorizes, it will start CMD command RD with a delay of 10 minutes, which is remove directory, and it removes the content of users directory and also logical disks D, E, F, and G. And here we can make a conclusion about the motivation of this attack, which is destruction of infrastructure, of a network, or endpoint destruction. So let's prove the connection with PhantomCore. On this slide, you can see two screenshots. Both of them describe creation of a planned task and its persistence in the system. There are two malwares from 2024 and 2022, and we can scroll down and we can see schedule functions. They are similar to each other in their realization, which is not presented on the slide. But by parameters, we can see that the difference is only one parameter. The second one in StartRat 2022, it's PCLU.exe. It's a file that will be run. This is how criminals run the malware. But in 2024, it's built into the function. It doesn't have an argument. If not. Also, I wanted to draw your attention to the name of the task. In both cases, it's Microsoft Statistic Core. It's a unique name. Even PhantomCore got its name from the part of this planned task. And please pay attention on the right in the bottom, you can see name of the file of configuration of the planned task. In both cases, it's tsk.xml, and the lead, how it gets persistent. They plan a task, and it's not processed by symbols. It's just double brackets, and these symbols are connected with an identical shift, so they're completely duplicated. We tried to find it on VirusTotal or Stack Overflow and GitHub, but it doesn't have any open source versions. There are no binary files as well.
We believe this is unique, and this is how we connect these two activities. While in 2022 the motivation was to destroy infrastructure, while in 2024 we see encryption and ransom. Let's get back to reality. In this slide, you can see a distribution of email recipients by industry. This is based on our statistics data. IT, development and industry, technoparks, utilities. However, we didn't notice any precise filtration by industry. We know nothing about attacks against ministries, government entities, government companies or military. Normally, these are all aimed at commercial profits. This is an example of a compromised infrastructure. The first thing is emails. I'm sorry it's all blurred out in the screenshots, but we don't have an intention to compromise this infrastructure further. Indeed, there is no spoofing. These mails have been actually sent. This is a case of emails being sent from a compromised infrastructure type. This contains a specific prefix in its domain, then we see the IP address and our graph. The IP is indeed associated in the A record for the mail server. Another case of compromised infrastructure is placement of malware on hacked servers. There are two addresses. These are not masked. Why? Because these have been published in research papers by Tylos and Cyber. Therefore, in both cases, the attackers used XLS vectors. They placed shellcode, and we had a persistent exe module here, and it was back in December 2024. That was on a compromised domain. KCDL3, that was the name. What happens following infection? These are the tools found as a result of malware. First, there's a service wrapper that enables attackers to run an application as a system service of Windows. RevSox instrument for tunneling traffic via SOX 5 protocol and reverse connection to server's Chisel, a tool for tunneling TCP, UDP traffic via HTTP, working on a client-server basis. Xen, All Password Pro, tool for extracting password for system data. Mobex, Term, tool for remote system administration. Sliver, a C2 framework. Mesh Agent, a tool for remote system management. On this line, it is in-house built malware classified as PhantomCore.taskRat. We focused on the network infrastructure used. We didn't detect any other tools, but we have more cases where this malware was used. It was distributed along with PhantomRat. Even though the features are pretty much similar, it does everything PhantomRat does. At the same time, it can delete any chosen process. It is written in C++, highly obfuscated, which is not typical for malware by this tool in this language, like KCDL and KCDL3. We attribute this tool to this group, but there is a caveat. Is this headmare or not? Many researchers associate headmare and PhantomCore with the same group. They have a popular Twitter account where they publish the details of compromised Russian organizations. It is basically a ransomware group. And there is a list of publicly available attacks. The victim infrastructure got encrypted. This is where PhantomCore tools were detected. At the same time, LockP3 babuk were used with configurations normally attributed to the headmare group. According to our data, the group PhantomCore may be associated not only with headmare, but also with other pro-Ukrainian ransomware groups. Therefore, we cannot state that PhantomCore is headmare, and we track these two groups separately. What is the key takeaway here? I would like to refer to Semyon Rogachev's presentation, who spoke yesterday. Should we provide for attribution? We know the source, pro-Ukrainian groups. Motivations, ransomware, Lockbit, Babuk, they are everywhere. They are ubiquitous. And attribution based on tools, it's not a secure approach. This is motivated politically. Take into account the Ukrainian threat. The first traces are dated 2022. They still perform high quality and frequent emailings. They use unpopular initial vectors. As discussed, they use both compromised infrastructure for sending out emails and for placement of their malware, as well as they register their own ones. These are C2O addresses. They keep modifying their malware, including changes to programming languages. In May, which is not listed, we detected another attack. A Python loader went away, a Golang loader replaced it. It is not in the slides, and these groups are obviously associated with ransomware groups. That's it. Your questions are most welcome, and I have two gifts for you, a t-shirt and a book. These are prizes to be awarded for best questions.
Добрый день, спасибо за доклад.
Good afternoon, thank you for your presentation. I come from Belarus. Did you ever encounter PhantomDL not on C++, not on Golang, but in Rust? Could you please share that in details? Yes, we can exchange contacts. We have 6 hosts that went where you told us earlier. Another question. You mentioned vulnerabilities being exploited, but if the version is 6.23, in the stack with this vulnerability, it opens up loopholes for this group. We did have such cases, version 6.26. Did you have any cases where they exploited this vulnerability? It can be the case because the executable file is in this archive. If the user opens up this directory and runs this executable, it will not run if they open a PDF, but if they execute an executable file, they'll still get exploited. I don't remember the text version. It establishes a connection automatically. The tests I ran on 6.26 specifically, only a PDF would run. The executable wouldn't run. Thank you very much. Hello? I have 2 questions. First, which persistence techniques, apart from scheduling via task scheduler, did you detect, identify when analyzing hackers' activity? For roadshare RDP technique, as discussed, a file was copied to the startup directory of the victim's host, and then system services. This is late-stage infection. This is one of the detention techniques. Second question. Please name top 3 methodologies or methods that were not used for information and cybersecurity in companies that would prevent attacks from being successful, regardless of vulnerabilities to WinRAR, software, and others. I see at least 2. LNK files were not banned. Yes. Second, the email gateways let that through. They failed to scan the contents. Could you please elaborate on that further? That will be beneficial for all Russian companies. I would definitely propose EDR systems. It will analyze the whole chain. No matter how many policies you apply, they will always find a way. If we share all of these, they're going to change their attack vectors tomorrow. Yes, LNK should be banned. You should pass this with information security tools. If you see a command like cmd start, that's suspicious right away. Apart from that, please keep your software updated, and you highlighted WinRAR, but rather we should work on information protection tools. I'm not sure about policies, though. They will always find their way in. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. My first question is this. Which businesses did they target? Is it SMEs, small businesses, middle-sized businesses, or large enterprises? Answer. These were normally large enterprises. I'm not sure about small ones. Yes, these were the enterprises targeted. They normally use SOCs. They connected via SOCs. Didn't you ever think that enterprises might have proxies that wouldn't let SOCs through? And there is Chisel that doesn't operate via SOCs. We mentioned open source, and I would like to again refer to Semyon Rogachev's presentation on open source and issues of attribution. Open source, it's so easy to modify. You can use ngrok, you can use Cloudflare tools. It's very variable, and they will always find a way. Look, they used ThreatRat in 2022. Yes, it offers vast capacities and features. New ones. Why does it now have limited features? When malware has too many features, it's easier to detect because
ПО, когда оно имеет одну функцию, но через нее можно сделать все.
Worst kind of malware is one that is lightweight, performs one function that allows you to do everything you want. This is the hardest one to detect. Sometimes evolution is about reducing the code to prevent it from being detected. Why don't they want to use keyloggers and screenshots? Answer. They will then install a mesh agent managing the system. Probably screenshots are not required. When you can run any arbitrary CMD commands, that's it. This is made for their convenience. You can download a file onto the host via CMD, as you can perform arbitrary commands. They keep some additional features for their convenience, but there is no actual use to that. You say that they sent out emails from compromised organizations. Probably they did not compromise other organizations. Probably found a relay. Answer. We also detected, if I got your question correctly, when we run this one in a sandbox, at a certain point we get a shutdown command. They can judge somehow whether it has Active Directory. And then they decide whether they will proceed exploiting the attack, whether they will continue downloading further stages, or they will just stop the infection at that point. How did they execute the exfiltration to put pressure on companies from both sides? If we check the Twitter accounts of such groups, you will see that. If we refer to ransomware, yes, of course, they can pull data, upload it to their systems. We can check their Twitter account and see how many documents they like posting. Thank you.
Все, в принципе, да? Я так понимаю.
Is that it? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Так, футболка и книжка. Сейчас.
We have two prizes, a T-shirt and a book. The book goes to you. Thank you. Here is your prize.
А футболку вам. Спасибо большое.
And the T-shirt goes to you. Thank you very much.
Спасибо вам еще раз. Спасибо.
Thank you. Thank you so much.